In last week's episode of the Financial Freeman podcast, we revealed how the government are underreporting inflation figures by as much as 10% every year. This week, we tell you how they do it and what you should do about it. So, let's take a step back a bit. Can you remember how the government calculate inflation, Ronnie?
Yes, they do it with lies. But would you like the title of it?
Yeah, what's it called? What's the index that
the CPI?
CPI.
The
Consumer
Price Index.
Okay, and what is that? What is it supposed to do?
It just tallies up all the things that they want to put on the list that you spend money on, but not all the things. Okay. So it does your food, and it does your cars.
Yep.
And it does your pets, and it does your clothes.
Good.
It's the only two things it doesn't do, is it?
Well, so the main item that's missing, and this is their first bit of trickery, if you like, is that basically nothing property related is included, which sounds strange because property costs, be it sort of mortgage, if you've got a mortgage, or rental costs, if you rent, usually equate to about a third of people's expenses. So you would think that would make up roughly potentially about a third of the basket. It doesn't. Okay. Now, their argument for this, the government's argument, is that people see houses as an investment, as a commodity, and not as somewhere that you need to basically spend money on to live. Now, I'm not sure this is right, because there's...
What's your alternative?
What's your alternative? You've got about 20% of the market, which is captured by investors. Okay, so fine, there's a good argument to say that obviously they're not living in it.
1 in 5.
And 1 in 5. And there's about 6% that have got some kind of social housing or assisted living. Okay, so 25%, let's call it, a quarter of the market. But the other 75%, well, they're owner-occupiers. Okay, so you could argue they understand house prices and they're happy to spend so much money on a house because they know in theory it should go up over the long term. They might not buy a house if they think it's going to crash in the next sort of 30 years, but they've got no alternative. And so they're actually buying it to live in it. So in that respect, it's a cost of living. If you don't pay your mortgage or you don't pay your rent, you're going to be turfed out eventually. So you need it if that's what you want to be doing as part of your living expenses. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, so that's number one. And that's obviously if they did start including rent or property related items such as a mortgage, then the cost of the basket would be going up a lot higher, because as we've discussed countless times on various different episodes in the past, rent has gone up historically, as have mortgage payments, because the house prices go up. So even if the interest rates stay the same, you're paying a lot more nominally. So the basket should go up a lot higher if property related items were included. Okay, so the next three are all sort of grouped together, and it's the way that the CPI is. The next three items on our list are all ways that the CPI is essentially manipulated, and it's very crafty. So we'll go on to the first one, which is what we call substitution. Now, every year this basket essentially gets updated, okay, on an annual basis. Now, that makes sense because us as consumers, us as people, we spend on different things each year, okay? So I'm happy with the principle that it gets updated, but it's how they update it, which is where I think there's a lot of abuse in the system. So I'm going to give you an example, which is hand sanitizer, okay? So hand sanitizer is kind of shot to life, if you like, in the last 2 years, but it wasn't added to the consumer index until when?
Last year. When it should have been added the year before.
Yeah, so it got added. It got added in March 2021, okay? But it already kind of hit all the shelves in March 2020, and people were paying stupid money for it in March and April. Maybe they just forgot. No, I don't think they did forget, really. I think actually what happens is that the price had ballooned up, so you were paying, I don't know, £2 for your little squeezy, and then suddenly by March 2021, you're then paying £1 again, okay? But what they do is that they say that, right, the price has gone down, okay? So they see market down, of the and that's sort of forms part of a deflationary side of a basket, if that makes sense. So there's prices that are weighing it down as a result, or they might swap items that are going up in price with ones that are going down in price. So again, it looks like actually things aren't going up in price completely when they really are. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, next one is called geometric weighting, which sounds very complicated but isn't.
My mind's already blown.
Right. So there's various different categories within the CPI. Okay, one of them let's say is healthcare. Okay, now this is an American example, but it could work equally as well here. In America, they spend roughly about 17% people spend about roughly 17% of their overall expense on healthcare, which is obviously huge, a lot higher than we do. But in the basket of goods in America, it should equate to what?
17%.
17%. But it doesn't. It equates to much lower. Can you guess?
7.
6. Very good. 6. Much lower.
So
now that's because healthcare costs are rising an awful lot in America. Okay. Now if they didn't fiddle it, then again the inflation starts going through the roof. So what they need to do is they just say, right, well, we're going to assign a weighting of 6%. I don't know how, but they just do. Okay.
So where have you found out the real figures?
It's all published information. So one of the websites is called shadowstats.com. Very, very interesting stuff. And there's loads of commentary all over this kind of stuff once you kind of start digging in. But these are real figures. Now, if they included the 17% like they should do, as I said, inflation goes a lot higher. Okay. The last example, which how they sort of manipulate the CPI, is what they call hedonic adjustment.
Isn't it good though that they keep inflation low?
No, this is what we discussed last week.
Is it?
Yeah, because actually it is a lot higher, and we'll come on to this at the end why it does really matter.
Oh, because then they don't put the wages higher.
They don't put sort of payouts, social security payouts are less, but also it keeps their debt down. But actually, it is higher. The goods.
Inflation keeps their debts down. They want inflation.
Yeah, they want inflation, but the key is that the prices actually are going higher. It's just it's not being reflected in this figure that you see. So this. Let's just park it for a second, but actually the situation is a lot worse than what we're realising. Okay, does that make sense? Because inflation's higher than what you're being told.
Right, well so
that if actually you think you're only losing 3% a year on the money in your bank, you're actually losing, say, 10% a year. Things are actually getting 10% more expensive.
Uh-huh.
Well, then you need to somehow have a way of beating that.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Really, really, yes. Okay, good. So, back to the third thing before we kind of discuss that in a tiny bit more detail, is what they call hedonic adjustment. Now, what this is take the iPhone 12, which I think was the last iPhone that was created, let's say, last year. Okay, and let's say that cost £1,000. Okay, so that's the brand new iPhone. You wanted to go out and buy the best iPhone, you'd spend £1,000 on it. Great. Okay.
Woo!
Now, in the basket for 1 year later, okay, so it costs £1,000, but then 1 year later they produce an iPhone 13, which also costs £1,000. Okay, because that's basically because technology moves on, and they've managed to produce that phone for £1,000 as well. Now, in the basket, what figure do you think they should use? Do you think they should use the 800 or the 1,000? So the new iPhone or the old iPhone, basically.
It depends what more people are buying now.
Well, everyone wants to go out and buy your shiny new phone, like they did last year.
The new iPhone, £1,000 should be on.
£1,000, okay. Now some people, it's not. It's only 800. Now some people will go out and buy the £800 phone. That's fine, but they were doing that the year before. They were buying kind of a cheaper phone. But if you want to go out and buy the latest one, you've got to go and pay what you paid last year, which was £1,000. So it shouldn't show that 20% drop in price, which it does. Okay, so actually they're saying it's deflation, but it's not. It's actually stayed the same. It's
just old stock. And
it's another way that they're basically fishing the books. Okay, now the last way that this inflation is sort of underreported is not necessarily the government's fault, although they obviously know it's going on, and that's something called shrinkflation. Any guesses as to what that might be?
It's the opposite of inflation.
Yeah, shrinkies. Like what it is that take your bag of crisps, okay? Back in the day, it might have used to have been, I don't know, 30 grams maybe. So now it might be, say, 25 grams. So instead of getting 22 crisps, you may only get 15 crisps. Okay.
Great for the waistline.
It's great for the waistline, but bad for the pocket, because a lot of people now buy sort of bigger bags and probably munch through them. So they're actually probably having the same amount of crisps, but they're probably spending more to get that crisp fix that they had beforehand. So it's probably not a good thing actually for the waistline. But anyway, it's certainly bad because...
You don't buy a family bag of crisps just because you lost 5 grams.
I reckon some people say, I deserve it. I deserve that bigger bag. Anyway, I don't know. I've not done an interview about people crisps.
Please contact us if you have any thoughts.
Exactly. But it does show that you are certainly losing out. And actually that same bag, if you were still to get your 22 crisps in your 30 gram bag, you should in fact be paying more now.
You should have seen Gary count out the crisps in a 30 gram bag before this episode.
I didn't, just for the record. Anyway, so that shows that actually the price should be going up in the basket, but they're keeping it the same. So they're keeping that one bag of crisps on there at 40p, when actually if you did the same weighting, it would go up to 50p. A huge rise in inflation again, but it's not being recorded. Okay. Shrinkflation. Okay, so we've covered all the ways that they sort of manipulate the system.
Does that only happen in food?
No, probably lots of things. It's a good question. Food was the obvious example, but I suspect it happens in lots of other.
Lots of
I don't know.
We can't currently name.
Okay, but we'll set homework to. Yeah, right. So why it matters? Okay, let's just let's recap that, because you tell me why it matters.
Why does it matter?
Yeah, this is happening. Why should we care about it?
Because you're getting less for your buck.
Yeah, less for your buck, exactly.
So,
why did it matter at 3% when we told everyone a few weeks ago that inflation was going higher and was actually sort of 3% or above? Why did that matter?
Because if you should just know where your money's going.
Yeah, because your money's going. Your money that was in the bank is losing its value every single year. Okay. Yes?
Yes.
But at 10%, it's happening a lot faster.
Yes.
And if you don't
That's
buy...
quite scary.
Really scary. Because you had £100,000 in the bank. Do you remember, what was it, Jack?
Yeah, I remember Jack.
Jack lost all his money that was in the bank for over a 50-year period, or most of it, okay? Now, actually, if you think about what's happening, he's losing it a lot faster if inflation is a lot higher. Okay, so he needs to do something about it. What does he need to do?
He needs to listen to you.
Yeah.
And needs to... Well, depends. He can either put it in stocks and shares. He can buy property.
Right, exactly. Investments.
Oh, that's the word.
Okay, investments. He needs to think about a plan. Okay, whatever that might be, he needs to not necessarily leave it in the bank, but he needs to find a way to beat it, because he's not going to be able to go and pick it outside Downing Street and say, please change the rulings and all of this, because they're not going to do it. In fact, it's probably only going to get worse because they've got to cover up more and more debt. So it's going to carry on, but Jack and everybody else listening needs a plan. Okay, so what should they do?
We should... Oh, right.
This is it. We're finished.
Oh, that's it?
I think so.
Right, you finished with a question.
Yeah.
That's a funny way to finish.
Well, there you go.
The content of this podcast is for general information purposes and not a recommendation to act. Please contact us or an independent financial advisor if you would like to discuss further. Contact gary.financialfreeman@gmail.com.
Goodbye for now.